I'm Tamara Thomas, editor-in-chief of UrbanHealthToday.com, part of the DocWire family of medical news sites, and I want to thank you for tuning in to Urban Health Weekly. Our goal each week is to keep you informed of the latest in health and medical news right from today's headlines. It's time to empower yourself with open conversations about your medical care with news that matters to you. So are you ready? Let's get started. I'm Tamara Thomas, editor-in-chief of Urban Health Today, and I'm speaking with Sherry McAllister, doctor of chiropractic and president of the Foundation for Chiropractic Progress. Today, she's going to talk about contain and eliminate, the history of the American Medical Association versus the chiropractic industry. Great to have you back, Dr. McAllister.
Well, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be on your podcast.
Thank you. I want to make a quick disclaimer before we start. This is in no way anti-AMA. This is history, plain and simple. The AMA also has pages on their website about this very topic. And for me, this is, in order to inform the present, you have to look at the past. So with that, let's jump in. So before we begin, can you give us some background about what a doctor of chiropractic does and their role within the medical community?
Absolutely. In fact, I am grateful that you did have that disclaimer up front because that is important to distinguish. This is absolutely in no way, shape, or form a slant. It's just giving the medical background that so many people really need to know so they inform themselves on what happened in the past and where we are today. So for chiropractors, our view is in fact different than where a lot of the medical practitioners in today look at a patient. And we do that more in a holistic way. We're actually looking at the patient as a complete whole. We're not just listening to their symptoms, but we're actually taking into consideration the past history that they've been through and other factors that play into their healthcare, such as what's happening at home. Is there extra stress at work? Is there something that's happening in that work site that might be causing some of the problems? How about their social unit? Do they have support? And in today's world, we know how important that really is.
Yes.
And then looking at the environmental impact on that patient. That's the key of where chiropractors sit. And it's slightly different because medical practitioners are looking for the cause of the symptoms. And I can say with certainty that chiropractors are looking for the solution to the whole person wellness.
So what was the relationship like between chiropractors and medical providers in the early 80s?
Well, let's say it was rather tumultuous. So in the early 1980s, they being the medical primary care physicians, we were just actually starting the relationship with medical doctors. After the publication in the Journal of American Medical Association, they actually revealed to their rank and file what was their covert activities that in fact they engaged in as an organization. Yes, I said covert activities, and I want that to resonate a little bit because it wasn't till many of the physicians that were members of the AMA actually heard from the AMA what they had done, that they actually started to build those relationships. And most of them had sent plenty of letters showcasing how appalled they were that this happened.
This was from physicians and other healthcare providers to the AMA.
That's correct.
So at what point did this friction begin between the AMA and chiropractic industry?
There probably isn't a quote time of when the friction began, but let's look at this as a whole. So here's what we know as fact. So knowing there's not really a specific time, but the AMA was actually focused on ensuring a monopoly in healthcare. And that's actually written in the lawsuit. Doctors of chiropractors were actually gaining ground, particularly in the state of Iowa, where in fact, that's where Palmer College started, and that's where the entire profession grew from. And what happened was that the AMA actually wanted to be the sole source of healthcare delivery. When it was discovered that chiropractors were gaining legislative advancement and many individuals were now going to doctors of chiropractic for conditions quite frankly, the medical community was not dealing with all that well. The musculoskeletal conditions such as back pain, neck pain, headaches, injuries, they actually had, because there was so many injuries with the farmers, they had their own name. It was called tractor back, which is where farmers were actually having low back pain. So the American Medical Association wanted to stop right there, that trend. And I think that's actually probably where the friction started. If there's if there's a time for anything, I think that's where we can say safely friction began in that environment.
So what happened was farmers began to prefer chiropractic care because it offered them more relief without um, without drugs.
Well, isn't that a statement? Let's just stop right there. Has time changed yet? I think about those things, and riding a tractor, well, many have never done it. It's actually a really, really difficult job to be on. A tractor can have a lot of safety problems. And if you're hopped up on a musculoskeletal pain reliever, you're putting everybody, your whole team at risk, on who you're working with. And one of the things that I think starts this problem with the farmers starting not to get the care that they're looking desperately for was, in fact, there was this unfortunate underlying current that the medical doctors were being educated about. And it started, and here's the showstopper, it actually started in medical school, where they started kind of denouncing what chiropractors, they called them quacks. It's actually even a painful statement for me to say, but it's a harmful and difficult moniker that even today has come up. It poisoned the minds of those medical physicians. And unfortunately, if you get in school, what do you do next? You take it with you into private practice, into hospitals, and unfortunately, other medical conditions or environments that you're going to be in. So that whole public relations campaign for the consuming public, there was a whole brand new negative articles and major publications and syndicated columnists. This is a true story. Ann Landers was paid by the AMA to slander the chiropractic profession. And so was the beautiful Elizabeth Taylor. And so, unfortunately, they were extraordinarily clever in how they pulled this off. And they actually brought and ghost wrote for many organizations so that they could filter what exactly was going to be said about us and where it was going to be released. So it was a very energetic project that they took on, enabling them to try to destroy the chiropractic profession.
It's funny you said that about the television. I remember as a kid the free use of the word quack. I didn't know at the time what they were referring to, but I remember. So it's funny that you brought that up because I do remember that term being used a lot in television when I was a little. I'm dating.
Yeah.
I remember that as a little girl. The dictionary defines a quack as a fraudulent or ignorant pretender to medical skill, a person who pretends professionally or publicly to skill, knowledge, or qualifications he or she does not possess, a charlatan. What do you say?
Ouch. I mean, doesn't that ring poorly? And I want to just share an example with you. So they're calling us not well educated or trained. Hold that thought.
Yeah.
Then when chiropractic colleges or institutions wanted to hire an MD or a PhD to teach in their chiropractic colleges, those individuals that they were going to hire were threatened by the AMA, threatened that if they took a job at a chiropractic college, they would be blackballed by the medical colleges. So you can't have it both ways. You can't claim DCs are less trained and then prevent individuals from participating in the educational process. So quack is a very unfriendly and undeserved terminology.
I mean, because the fact is that the average chiropractor is extremely educated and very knowledgeable I would argue in more ways because of the holistic nature of what you do, because you also look at the primary food um, more so than doctors who really sort of look at a part of the body and they don't interrelate the other parts of the body. So it's a very different, and I would argue, I don't want to say superior, that's my bias, but much more rounded look at the human body. So if I were a chiropractor, I take issue with that, the use of that word as well.
Well said. I very much agree with you.
Were there other, how else did they?
There is, in fact, let me share one clever, in my personal opinion, despicable way that the AMA did is they didn't want to be seen as the villain directly. So what in fact they would do is ghostwrite opposition positions for groups affiliated with the AMA. Who's affiliated with the AMA? The American Health and Association, the American Heart Association, the American Arthritis Association. So can you imagine when they would write these position papers for them so they could directly just read from their position papers in the press releases and the conference? It's literally just translating. They get up on stage at the American Heart Association and they would literally read the AMA's press release as if it was their own. And these affiliated organizations then became opposed to chiropractic through this very unhealthy and very unfortunate, slanderous and malaligned issue. So there's a lot going on in that particular realm, but imagine too that we weren't the only ones. We were just the ones that they were really pressing down on because we were gaining the greatest advantage. Because I know the podiatrists, have had several different conversations with them. They were denounced because orthopedists also work on similar problems, and
Mm.
psychologists were denounced because psychiatrists were dealing with mental problems. Same with optometry. You have your optometrist, they getting denounced because ophthalmologists were involved in the eye. So it was the same story over and over again, only first, front and center, the assault came on chiropractic.
So what impact did this have on the field?
Well, you have so many of the colleagues that are in the medical profession afraid to refer to a chiropractor. And the colleagues were feeling, frustrated, disappointed because they wanted to help their patient. But imagine where the patient was.
Yeah.
Some of them were told, if you go to a chiropractor, you'll no longer receive medical care. It is a stopping moment, and it's actually a fact, and it's written in deposition in some of the papers in the Wilkes case. So it's a big deal that really took over this profession and the healthcare of Americans across the nation.
And so how did patients react to this? Did they back away, or
I'm so glad you asked that question, because it's really there's a book, and it's actually sitting right beside me. It's called "It's Your Body, Your Choice," and it's by Dr. Moshe Meyerowitz, and it's an account. I actually read it. They gave it to me in Maine when I visited their conference a few months back. I read it. I couldn't put it down. And it had to do with how a senator in Maine was going to disallow chiropractic care as an option for patients. And it gives me chills because we don't have the finances. This is a true David and Goliath story. Maine only had 30 chiropractors. So they didn't have the money to come up against the Goliath of the AMA. And the senator put a full court press hard on this. And what happened? 700 patients with signs ranging from "I love my chiropractor, please don't take my choice away," to "without chiropractic, I wouldn't be here today." And they went and picketed. And then they went to the hearing that was unfortunately having to be rescheduled because there was too many people that came to talk about taking chiropractic away. And with those 700 patients that got to get their voice on the record, showstopper moment. those 30 chiropractors, they won and their patients won. And it shows that when a nation demands the care that they deserve, things will change.
Wow. Wow. That's the power of testimony. So at some point, chiropractors fight back, right? So how did you take the fight to the AMA? What was the tipping point for you?
Well, it sounds like a clandestine novel, but this is true. The AMA actually had a fallout with the group, the Scientologists. And in fact, because that happened, and only through the grace of who knows at the Scientology, they actually leaked the documents that they had in their possession from the AMA.
Oh, wow.
And for the first time, written in the AMA documentation was contain and eliminate the chiropractic
Ah,
profession. It written in their own handwriting, and that was leaked. And unfortunately, and fortunately, when these documents were actually released, then a lawsuit was filed. And the unfortunate part, the AMA started shredding documents, and the court intervened and ordered preservation of documents in place. And when the documents were actually discovered as having originated by the AMA, the litigation against the AMA and others who tried to contain and eliminate happened. And the great news, the chiropractors won. In fact, on September 25th, 1987, Getztener is an amazing judge. She issued her opinion that the AMA, quote, has violated Section 1 of the Sherman Act and that it had engaged in an unlawful conspiracy in restraint of trade to contain and eliminate the chiropractic profession. And she further stated that the AMA had entered into a long history of illegal behavior. And then she issued a, quote, permanent injunction against the AMA under Section 16 of the Clayton Act to prevent such future behaviors. And that's really the key. However, as we all know, sometimes people do get away. And we have records and an understanding that others were involved, but she didn't exonerate two of the defendants, the Joint Commission on Accreditation for Hospitals and the American College of Physicians. They were actually in some of the Scientology documents, but they were dismissed from the case. And I think, as you can see clearly, the case was significant. However, it was only the start of what the benefits of that long trial were for a patient needing non-farm care.
absolutely. So what happened as a result? So how did that change for patients?
So the excitement was now a patient isn't going to hide in the dark. Literally, patients were going to chiropractors in the dark so that their medical providers didn't know that they were attending. So now they could be more open and say, I'm seeing a chiropractor. Great news. MDs that were disgusted by this activity opened their referral pads up and said, let's try going to a non-farm option first. And then the laboratories, they would never see a referral from a doctor of chiropractic. Now they would take blood orders or x-ray orders. Hospitals would allow the patients to come in for diagnostic services. And the insurance companies, there was the big kicker. The insurance companies then began to change their policy, and the general public actually recognized that chiropractic had value and that the actual profession gained credibility that we never had before until this whole thing started and we had a campaign against us, because, as you noted, we are very well trained on the whole person.
Yes. So the AMA, as I said, they have been open about their history with chiropractors. As I said, they dedicated space to this on the website. However, I still haven't seen universal referring out to NPPs and chiropractors. So I wondered two things. Did they ever issue an apology for their actions? A, and B, where does chiropractic stand today versus where it stood pre-AMA hostilities?
Well, if you're asking me if they stood on a stage and announced how bad they were, the answer is no. They followed through with the court litigation request, which was they had to publicize and keep that publication on their website. So that's why you can read about this. But let's be honest, you got to dig down 10 layers into trying to find what really happened.
Mhm.
So history will show that the AMA has been less about health care and more, in my opinion, about an unhealthy relationship with big pharma. If
Mm.
you can give a pill, there's the old saying, a pill for every ill. And what I like to say, the McAllister quote, the future, a DC to whom will nurture. So you're looking at the volumes of information now coming out where a patient demands choice. And where does the chiropractic profession stand now before AMA? Well, there's no comparison. In fact, today, all of the chiropractic colleges are in fact accredited. Several universities are planning and already have planned to have chiropractic in their college lineup. Hospitals, they're employing chiropractors directly. And a lot of the hospital delivery systems are contemplating how to best treat their employees with a holistic approach. And what better way than a hands-on approach with a chiropractor? So you got insurance companies covering chiropractic. And I think now more than ever, we're starting to collaborate on the research. And that's huge because when collaboration in research happens, the patient's in a win-win because now they know research states. And so NIH is starting to actually share grants with us. So the credibility of the chiropractic profession is now greater than ever.
That's fantastic. Did you say that hospitals are now looking to include chiropractic as part of care for their staff?
Absolutely. Imagine having gone through a pandemic and the medical burnout.
Right.
So if you're physically burned out, what are you giving your employee? Are you giving them an opiate, a muscle relaxer? How are you really helping them?
Right.
Mental health and chiropractic go hand in hand. And when there's mental burnout, there's physical burnout. It's just how the body and nature of a professional outcome happens when you're overworked. And now, when you start to think about the benefits that chiropractic offers, the holistic, honest approach of talking to them about their sleep habits, their nutrition, their physical well being, and exercise, that comes from a highly trained individual. And that's where chiropractic prospers. We touch our patients, we feel literally their pain. And many of them are stressed out, tension, headaches, back pain. They've been on their feet 12 to 16-hour days over the pandemic. And I truly give a call out to all of them because we absolutely 100% respect and appreciate every single one of you for handling the pandemic the way you did and trying to help patients as at your utmost with the tools that you have. And it's the tools that chiropractic has that I think really makes a difference in their lives.
You know, it's interesting that that they recognize the benefits of it for themselves. But what about patients? I still haven't seen a wholesale, full-throated endorsement across the board. Look, we're still battling the opioid epidemic, right? Where doctors, I think by and large, are still giving people, here, take this pill, instead of, here, see Dr. So-and-so, see Dr. McAllister. What about patients?
It has to be a patient-centered approach. And your question is phenomenally important in today's world because when you center it around the patient, you're going to learn a couple of things. And you're absolutely right. There isn't a huge following and push to chiropractic care. And why is that? I will tell you, there's still some pretty significant curmudgeons that run the American Medical Association and other professional organizations that still have a slant for chiropractic. And that's my experience to date. The older MDs that were trained about how bad we were, the bias is still there. It's very, very difficult to break bias, as we know. And so it's going to take time. And most importantly, it's doing exactly what you're doing right now, is helping us understand that disease care is not health care, and that the chiropractic approach is holistic and concerns itself with the individual. And finally, the best approach to anything is the conservative approach.
this makes me think of what happened at the turn of the century to midwifery, where midwifery was very popular among immigrant and low-income women. Birth rates and maternal mortality was not an issue. And then states began to lean on midwives and push them out. And then what ended up happening? Maternal mortality went up. Infant mortality went up. You just saw that when you took the whole person out of the care, the quality of the care decreased. So I'm glad you guys fought back. And how can our listeners learn more about this topic?
Well, there is an actual book, and the book is called Contain and Eliminate, and it has a fabulous background on what is the facts, what are the stats, what really happened, who was impacted, some of the amazing celebrities that were actually involved. The book, like I said, could be a Netflix documentary, and maybe it should be, but there is a new podcast episode that we're calling the History Maker Record Breaker podcast. And we're asking that consumers listen to this legendary speaker. It's getting released on September 15th. It's close to our 127th birthday of chiropractic, and it's on Adjusted Reality. It's actually a podcast series that's trusted by the adjusted, and it's featuring Dr. Lou Sportelli, and everyone in the profession absolutely adores this man. He's 60 plus years in practice, and he is an epic legend in being part of that lawsuit and being able to showcase how the past started to impact the present. And he also is a thought leader for healthcare. So he talks about the present and he moves you into the future. And for those that are listening, never ever take for granted your options. Your barriers to care are real, and we need to inspire you by this podcast to share with you some of the barriers that are in place against you even today. So we welcome your listeners to learn more about chiropractic. If they don't have a doctor of chiropractic, they can go to our website, f4cp.org/find a doctor. But we have a lot of information out there for your listeners, and we're just very grateful to be able to educate, because once you know, you do better.
That's exactly right. Sherry McAllister, thank you so much. As always, a pleasure talking to you, a pleasure learning from you.
Absolutely my pleasure. We thank you for getting this information out, and 100% agree with you that, in fact, it is our AMA friends that can work with us and build a bigger, brighter, braver future for our consumers.
Thanks for listening to Urban Health Weekly today. I hope you'll join me and my friends next week so you can stay informed and inspired to take control of your health. See you next time.